I'm Matt Booker.
I'm Dave Laird.
And I'm Jessica Anthony, coming to you from a swimming pool in Portland, Maine, here on the Concavity Show.
Jessica Anthony, welcome back to Concavity Show. This is episode 80, and you are a returning guest. You were here in September of 2020 with us for episode 56. So a lot of life has happened in about almost 4 years since you were back on the show. Welcome back. It's so great to have you again.
Thank you so much for having me back. It's great to be talking to both of you again.
We didn't burn our bridge with you last time. I'm so thankful.
Careful, you're talking about bridges right away. The bridging is, you just dropped that bomb on the bridge right away.
Yeah.
That was question number 20 down on my list.
It was?
About 4 years ago. I mean, that must have been during the COVID, right? Like your book launched right at the beginning of COVID. Is it one of those books, right?
March 24th, 2020, Enter the Aardvark was published.
We had a good chat about that last time, about how derailed things got for you.
Yeah, well, it's okay. Isn't it? Because if you look at it comparatively with what else was going on in the world, the launch of a minor and insignificant novel is, really not that big of a deal. That being said, yes, of course, one is a little gloomy about all the work that you put into the production of a novel, only to see a global pandemic take it away from you. No, I mean, the absurdity of the situation was such that, what can one do,
Yeah.
But yeah, no, here we are, 4 years later, and I'm excited to talk about this new, also very brief little novella that I've written, that hopefully folks will like, called The Most.
The Most. And in case you somehow missed this around the internet, this book is coming out next month in July. What's the exact publication date, Jess?
July 30th.
30th, okay. So you've got a little bit of time to pre-order The Most by Jessica Anthony. This is your fourth book, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yep,
So people who are familiar with you or this show will have heard lots about The Convalescent, which came out from McSweeney's in, what was it, 2008, 9?
It was 9, yeah.
9,
nice memory,
okay.
yeah.
Sweet. I just taught English 12 for the first time, and I had a magical realism unit, and I gave them a reading list of 20 magical realist novels, and I put The Convalescent on it. And one of my students read it, and I was so excited that someone chose it. And I talked to him after about it and debrief, and I'm not sure the extent to which he got it, but I prefaced the unit with your quote from our episode last time, which was that, and then sometimes bonkers shit happens. I think that's a great description of magical realism as a genre. So
sure.
The ending, I think he said that I didn't quite get it when he turned into a cockroach at the end. And I was like, cockroach? Read the first chapter again, man. Butterfly.
A cockroach doesn't have a proboscis, man. What's wrong with you?
Totally. And then
you're 18. You should know that.
Then I had another student who read The Metamorphosis for the same independent novel study project. So maybe he was talking across the aisle with that student a bit too much. And cockroaches on the brain.
And his friend in The Convalescent was Mrs. Kipner, the little cockroachy insect.
Yes, yeah,
so
yeah.
I think that
where he got it from.
Mrs. Kipner really just came to life for that kid, and he really wanted some kind of mutual habitat between those two identities. But thanks for teaching it, man. Though that's so nice of you to teach that novel. Thank you.
I wanted to do it as a whole class novel study, but budgetary concerns were such in the department that I couldn't get a class set.
Oh, completely.
But I might try next time for sure, though. You also are the author of Chopsticks and Enter the Aardvark, which we had you on last time to talk about. You were a finalist for the New England Book Award in Fiction. You've won lots of other awards too, like the Creative Capital Award in Literature. And you live and teach in Maine. And now we've got The Most by you, which is, like you said, is a novella. We've got, 133 pages here on the count. So it's a really great summer read here. It's take it to the beach. You could maybe even finish it in one sitting if you had a good suntan situation. Not going to get burnt. Tell us a bit about how did this book arrive on the brain for you? Last time I remember you said you started with the title, like Enter the Aardvark just popped into your brain, and then you just conceived of the book, based on the title. Where did the most come from?
Well, a few different places. I don't know if last time I told you guys about my bridge guarding. I think
we definitely talked about that.
We talked about the bridge guarding.
And this book's dedicated to the guards at the bridge, right?
Yes, it sure is. Yeah. So this is also a product of those months that I spent guarding a bridge in Slovakia on the Danube River over into Esztergom, Hungary. And the Czech and Slovak word for bridge is most. And so when I sat down to write specifically this novella, I had the title, I had the most. I liked the tension of its duality, the Czech meaning and the English meaning, and then in the back of my mind, I was thinking a little bit about this really kind of out there news article I read in, I want to say somewhere around 2010, like a long time ago, gosh, almost 15 years ago now, about this man living in this apartment complex who refused to get out of his swimming pool. And he was naked, maybe not wholly there. Yeah.
Okay.
And I just thought it was not a long article. It was just a brief little snippet about this guy who was giving his neighbors a hard time, and eventually they got him out, But I know there's a part of me in the back of my mind, I always thought that might be something fun to write about. So I tucked that away, and then I'm sitting down with the most, and I had been thinking about, obviously, my job as the bridge guard is to have bridges on the mind, and so I asked myself, what is the ultimate bridge? And it is, of course, some connection, some relationship you have with another human being, and the problems that arise from a human being that you have to spend a very, very long amount of time with, which is, of course, some kind of a partner or a spouse. And so here we are. I'm thinking about writing about a marriage. And I'd also been teaching a course on women writers of the 1950s, which is a lit class that I developed just purely sort of by accident. I realized that a lot of the writers that I was really into reading at the time were just publishing their work in the 50s. And so, I'm talking about Carson McCullers and Shirley Jackson and Flannery O'Connor and Gwendolyn Brooks and Grace Paley. So, yeah, I mean, it occurred to me like maybe you're writing a novel about a housewife, in the 50s. And I get really excited about cliche and tropes as like a genesis for, and not surrealism per se, but just for an opportunity to kind of crack open narrative in a different way. So yeah, I thought it might be fun to walk into that trope. And so in the most, we have all of the lovely trappings of Americana. We have the golfing, we have the apartment complex, we have the televisions, we have the movies, we have the church services, and the tennis. Yeah. I mean, we are in Delaware. I'm thinking about the swimming pool as a place of resistance to all of this other material, the kind of materialism, the material world around Kathleen Beckett, who is the housewife. And I just started writing Kathleen and thinking about how she just didn't really feel well one morning. It's a warm Sunday morning in November, and she decides to take a swim in her community swimming pool, and then she doesn't get out for the rest of the day. And I don't want to like blow the story for anybody, but she doesn't get out by the end of the novel. We don't really know whether she gets out or not. And so, yeah, I liked the idea of having a character just stay put for an entire book. I liked the idea of an entire book happening over the course of 8 hours, And so that's how this little creature came to be, was just walking into the cliches that I think most of us think of when we think of the 50s, and then finding a way around those cliches into something that's a little bit darker and a little bit more contemporaneous,
You're fond of little creatures in your books.
I am fond of little
Rovar,
creatures.
we've got aardvarks in this book itself.
You're reading me so well, man. Like, Dave, you got it. That's my gig. It's little weird creatures.
And there's a little Greek super for the building named Cosmo,
Yes.
who's
My homunculus.
he's
Yes.
described as a little troll at some point.
Yes.
That's right.
And I loved that. And there was one mention I wrote down in the back of the book that said armpit is described as a muskrat dungeon. And I was like,
Yes.
okay, here we go. This is some Jessica Anthony descriptions. Here we go. But I wanted to ask you a question about that, what you just said, like 1950s cliches, suburban couple. I went back and, I love the book, Revolutionary Road, and I was just broke one of my cardinal rules, which is never talk about another book when you're focused on the actual book we're supposed to be promoting here. But I also think, was it Cormac McCarthy said books are made out of books, right?
It's true.
So anyways, Revolutionary Road, I didn't read the whole book again, but I went back and watched the movie. And one thing that strikes me about a lot of these 1950s cliches, or really any movie or book about a contentious marriage, is there's usually some big like blowout fight scene. And I wanted to ask if you were tempted to write some kind of big blowout confrontation, or did you studiously kind of try to avoid doing that?
There's never going to be a fight between these two, ever. I mean, they don't have
They're
it
pretty
in them.
docile, yeah. Virgil's pretty laid back as a husband.
Well, and part of it is, I have to say, if I can speak in a way that makes me always really uncomfortable, and that's autobiographically, but I mean, I've been married for 24 years, almost 24 years. And, my husband and I, my partner and I, we don't like to argue that much. We aren't arguers. We aren't fighters. Both of us had, family members who were sort of like, they were loud and they were tough and they would fight you. There'd be fighting in the family growing up. And so we found each other and we were like, yeah, we don't really want any of that, But that's also an interesting kind of place to be, right? Where you're never really arguing with your spouse ever. I mean, if we have an argument, the other one kind of like peeks the head around the corner, like, are we still unhappy with each other? Is everything okay after a few minutes? But we just don't have these arguments. And so I was thinking about kind of hyperbolizing that relationship problem, which is to say, making not arguing like the problem, making an unwillingness to kind of face real challenges in your relationship head on, and what that withholding might look like, and how if you allow it to go on for too long, what the consequences might be of not actually ever really talking to each other.
You mentioned the word tension earlier, and this book really explores the tension of that in a marriage.
Yeah,
a lot of just not dealing with stuff ever at all.
Just not dealing with it.
And then what happens? Yeah.
What is the outcome? So that's just to answer your question. I mean, it never even occurred to me to have them fight.
And did that influence your decision to sort of switch between the perspectives as well as really trying to empathize with both the husband and the wife as people, as characters?
Yeah, I didn't want to empathize with either one of them. I didn't want to feel badly for them or worry about them. I wanted to sort of watch them microscopically, weirdly. I tried to follow them in small detail just to sort of see what they would do with their day, And so when Virgil leaves Kathleen after the first chapter to go play golf with his friends, we return to Kathleen in the second chapter, so that disrupts time, and that begins a pattern of time disruption throughout the entire novella, which does some, I think, kind of cool destabilizing work, unsettling the reader a little bit. You have to kind of orient yourself at the beginning of each chapter. But yeah, when Virgil goes off to play golf, when we finally return to him, we remember, oh yeah, he's golfing. And then there are these legacy problems at work that have followed him, and he has to engage with the guy he hasn't seen in a month because his son died, and that's a really awkward conversation to have and scene to dramatize. And so I guess I was less interested in creating in scene sort of the obvious problems in the novel, and it was more fun to kind of watch Kathleen talking to her landlord and watch Virgil talking to his golf buddies. So
Who are also his coworkers, right?
Who are also his coworkers. Yeah. It's a domestic fiction.
Firm.
It's a very different kind of novel than the books that I've written before.
It is. It's very distinct, yeah.
But at the same time, it's kind of not, at least in my mind. I mean, it's a dark little sucker. I mean, that opening epigraph is, it's like, it's cribbed a couple of lines from All the Things You Are, right? Which is the Oscar Hammerstein and Jerome Kern. And if you really look at those opening lines of that epigraph, and someday I'll know that moment divine when all the things you are mine. I mean, that is a fairly terrifying prospect, right? Like that.
To be owned by somebody
in that way? To be complete, all the things you are mine,
Yeah. That's very possessive, isn't it?
Yeah. So I guess I was enjoying just thinking about the whimsy in this domestic space too, right? The strangeness and the horror that's lurking beneath the surface, if I can speak obviously about like the subterranean stuff that's going on here. I mean, the entire novel is about what isn't being said. So
you mentioned like situating it historically in the 1950s, and you mentioned like women writers of the 50s, American writers. The style of this book, like on a prose level, is very different from your other work too, and it feels to me like something that was written in the 1950s.
Yes.
So not only are you writing about the 50s, but you've kind of embodied like the style of that time. And so, like you mentioned, Flannery O'Connor, a lot of this book feels like Flannery O'Connor style prose to me. There's a great line on page 26 about the pastor, about quote, "I would be a reverend," she often thought, "if there was someone to make me dinner every night."
That's O'Connor.
And I was sitting on my like reading chair, and I reached over to my bookshelf and pulled out A Good Man Is Hard to Find, and I was like, that reminds me of a line from that story, which is when the misfit said she would have been a good woman if it had been somebody there to shoot her every minute of her life.
Yep.
And I read that line, and I just felt like that has to be a Flannery O'Connor nod.
It's a nod.
It's so good. And as a result of doing that, I actually found a bookmark that I've been missing for months and months and months, and I was so happy to find. It's like an old photograph of Rachel, so it was like this destiny moment. It was perfect.
Bonus moment.
Is there any do you want to elaborate on like sort of the influence of those women writers that you talked about a little bit on this novel? Is there?
Well, I mean, I'll just say that like it was really fun to live in a voice that felt so dramatically different from the type of style of fiction that I've been writing, and just to try to think of the expansive possibilities of my voice as a person who is now entering into her 5th decade, and exercising in kind of a Jerzy Kosinski kind of way, like a little bit of stage play, like allowing my narrator to be a bit of a character and perform a role that they've never had a chance to play before. So it's so cool that you got that line. You will not be the only one, I'm sure, and it's obvious for a very deliberate reason, which is to signal, I hope, to the reader that there is an apparatus here, that it is meant to feel as though it is an undiscovered document, basically, like a forgotten novel from the 50s, from 1957. That was the feeling that I wanted to try to capture.
You nailed it.
Oh, thanks.
You really showed off like your versatility as a writer.
Thank
you. It reminds me of in Zoolander where he's talking about his calendar. It's like, really, you showed off my versatility, but every photo is like the same exact image of his face with a different background. But no, actually, you are very versatile, as evidenced by this book, unlike Derek Zoolander.
Oh, I love that Zoolander just came up in our conversation. Yeah, that's so great. Thank you.
I equate that word with versatility in my brain. It's a great space to be in.
And I was going to say, obviously, thing that is unique about this, is focusing on this woman in the 1950s. There is like this cliche of women feeling trapped by the patriarchy, by gender roles. And I think, that was sort of at the top of my mind as I'm reading this is, how important still a woman's decision to reproduce is the dominant, often decision in her life, to reproduce or not. And the importance of birth control and Roe v. Wade, like all of this is going through my mind as I'm reading this progression that, this is 1958, right? 1959?
57,
57, so 1957, before the 1960s, before the 1970s. There's a sort of entrapment, right, of these characters, of this woman, really. You really do play with that idea of like, who is it that is trapping whom here? Who feels trapped? Is it the husband or the wife? Or is it some third woman as well? And is it everyone who is trapped? And so when you were describing like almost playing with these characters, like from a microscopic level, like I was envisioning them sort of like how you trap a bug under a glass,
Yes.
But also like in their lives, like a lot of people were in that time, they were trapped. So, how much when you did want to tell the story about a relationship, talk about the idea of putting back the 1950s where, the women were sort of trapped by the patriarchy. Like what drew you to that idea?
Oh yeah. I mean, we definitely still are. It's still happening. And for that reason, I think the novel also is, contemporaneous in its way. It both feels, I hope, like a relic, but also like a kind of a reminder, in some way. We didn't have the birth control pill in the 1950s. Women couldn't buy a home. They couldn't, open a bank account, I don't think, without their husband's permission. I mean, there were no jobs. You could get work as a teacher, nurse, or secretary. It's just a completely different kind of consciousness to try to inhabit. But you have to also remember that these are human beings. I mean, they are not waking up every morning and thinking, oh my God, I'm so oppressed. I'm so trapped here in this apartment, in this shitty apartment complex, What they're doing is they're getting up and they're in a mood or a different mood, They need to eat something. They are responsible to the kids in some way. Kathleen is not a radical figure. She is not protesting against the system, as it were. She is protesting her inability to be herself, which is in her own mind sort of a completely separate problem from these outside forces that are pressing down upon her. She is struggling to kind of find the words and the language to, be honest with her husband for the first time ever, really, about what their marriage really is and who she really is in this relationship. And so like that's the thing she's pushing against. It really has nothing to do with the apparatus, even though that's bearing down on the both of them. It's just a very matter-of-fact report of a human being in a single day reaching the point where suddenly the center can no longer hold, right? Where suddenly all the way that it's been going up to this moment has to change. And so by the end of the novel actually happens in the penultimate chapter. It's chapter 9 when it's over. I won't reveal what happens, but there's a dramatic action in chapter 9 that will signal some disturbance in their relationship. What happens is unknown, but she has forced this. She has brought this to a head, and she had no idea that this was the day when she got up in the morning, that this was going to be the moment, November 3rd, 1957, that she would finally tell the truth about who she was. But so it was.
And, this is maybe, like, I don't know that there's a moral to the story. I don't want to make it sound that way, but, I felt like by the end of this story, it does make the reader think about something like, being true to yourself or following your dreams. And that Kathleen does have this history of being a tennis, like she could have tried to have gone pro. There were pro tennis women players back then. And she did have this dream that was just hers. But there were these men sort of pulling her away from it. But I mean, that idea of you're being true to yourself. I mean, it just sounds so cliche. It's more than that, but that still sort of digs in her past. Even though this is all in one day, we're in her head. We're able to understand she does have this other sort of imagined path that she could have gone down.
Uh-huh.
Well, do you know how incredibly fundamentally hard it is to be honest, actually?
Yeah.
It's brutal.
Impossible, maybe.
It's impossible.
Yeah.
My dog is joining us. Sorry.
Come on in.
Yeah, for Kathleen, it's just she's facing what we all face, which is the impossibility of actually having to communicate to Virgil, how she really feels. And granted, it's hyperbolized in the novel, like what she's, the drama that she's about to confess and convey, but we all go through this every day. I mean, there are thousands of times a day when, we're forced with a moment where we have to be brutally honest or not, and we often choose not because there are consequences to this. And so there's this kind of hidden terrain in any marriage, this kind of untraveled land that will maybe never be fully mapped out, right? I mean, you really can never fully know another person because you can never fully know yourself. And so Kathleen is in a moment of, it's not just, yes, it's knowing oneself. If we're going to, take that trope, I'm happy to. It's the Latin term nosce te ipsum, right? Know thyself. But she can't. It's like is there a God? You can't know. So like, why bother trying, And I think that both she and Virgil have been in a kind of lackadaisical way, just moving, like living their lives through small movements and small actions and not ever really thinking about their own desire. What it is they actually want, not just from each other, but from themselves. And I don't know, I think this is what fiction can do, right? Like, this is what makes fiction awesome, is that it's not essay. It's not telling the truth about, like, my own personal experience with a certain kind of silence, right? Which is maybe would be interesting to some listeners, but maybe not others. I don't know. But fiction, like, it gives it a color. It gives it a sort of a universal quotient where suddenly Kathleen is all of us. It's not just how Jess might feel in a moment, but how we all feel about our relationships and our partnerships. And there's something about this pandemic that makes me feel like these kinds of questions are more important than ever before, because, so many people have, like, gotten divorces and they've had separations, and the COVID kind of blew up all these families. And so there was some pressure put upon these relationships in this, in this time that made the truth, force itself out.
Yeah.
And
it's like a pressure cooker.
It's a pressure cooker, and we feel it all the time now. I mean, my God, you guys, the last 4 days politically in the United States, right? Like, I don't know about you, but I just feel this weight. It's just bearing down. And so what can you control? You can control actually who you are and what you want. And so that may come to the sadness or the dismay of other people in your life, but you've got to be honest with who you are, because otherwise you're not going to make it, right? Like, none of us are going to make it. It is a brutal time in America right now. So
I got a marriage proposal from my friend Rob the other day.
You did?
Right after the debate, yeah. He's like, how can I get citizenship
Move
in
to
your country?
Canada.
But
I saw a really funny little meme that said, dear Americans, don't worry. You have an emotional support Canadian assigned to you, and they will be there to assist you.
Yeah, I'm here. DM
yeah.
But, and the idea of, like, sort of protesting, if you are working at an insurance company, you can sort of escape that a bit by going to the golf course. But if you are a housewife, like, you can't quit that job.
There's nowhere to go.
There's nowhere to go.
In an apartment complex.
You have to abandon your whole life, which is impossible, or, find a way to sort of mildly protest. And
you fuck your Greek landlord is what you do.
And that probably
As an
went on
act of,
more
like,
than
radical
we knew. Right?
empathy, though, in a way. This guy's going through some
A
stuff.
straight up
and-
horniness, I thought. It was just like, but I mean, that's part of like the anti-establishmentism, like of like, I can't, I have to break out of this a little bit. That Pressure Cooker definitely is like, it's a serene book in a way. It sort of lulls you into this marriage and this relationship. And like I said, there's no real fighting. But then once you get to know people, you realize, yeah, they are fucked up in their own way. And everyone's sort of fucked up in their own special way. And, that's a very interesting craft that you're able to sort of dole out these little history. Like how have you learned that over the years as a writer of like sort of holding something back and knowing when to put it into the book?
Oh, I mean, you're asking me like about the essence of like the magic of fiction, right?
Restraint,
like I mean, there's just no prescription for this. You, at least I think you just feel it out as you're writing. You start to understand there are some moments in the narrative that have to be dramatized, and there are other moments, in scene, and then there are other moments that are very speedily told or narrated to the reader, and you have to make, precision level, very close scalpel level decisions about like what info is coming out. Like there's a line in the opening of the novella where Virgil says, gee, I wonder if Kathleen is pregnant, and then he wishes it's a girl, and it's like, man, you guys, Virgil gets his wish, like by the end of this book.
I missed that on the first read and went back actually this morning and was rereading that opening chapter, and I was like, oh wow, the mention of a girl there, you sort of gloss over that until it has more meaning later. And
right.
I think that is a very crafty way
well,
of putting
it's tricky because you don't want to, I think, write so consciously that you're making those decisions deliberately, which is to say, I really hate the word foreshadowing. I think it's kind of a bullshit thing to do to readers. Like, and now...
How about prolepsis? Is that better?
Hey, I use prolepsis sometimes. I like the leap ahead. I do like the leap ahead. Yeah. But it can be really manipulative and gimmicky, and you can be directing your reader to, pretend to be feeling a certain way, or you can be dangling some, unholy carrot in front of them, and then they're just waiting, we're like, we know it's coming. And that's a bad feeling because that means that they are not in the dream of the character's mind, the character's consciousness. So I think if those moments happen, through the subconscious where you don't think twice about the sentence that's been written, and you just keep on in your winding way, and then you reach the end of the writing, and then you realize like, no way, that was there all along, and I had no idea. Then if you don't know, there's a good chance your reader won't either, that it just becomes totally. It's like the sponge that soaks up, right? So yeah, I would say like for those of you who are listening who are writing fiction, just to try to be as like anti-conscious as you possibly can, to try to drop into those spaces in your imagination where you don't even feel yourself making decisions. They're just being made, and have the faith that, hey, it's going to work out. This is going to work, You may not know where you're going, but that's the fun of it, right? Like if you knew, then you'd be a mathematician. You wouldn't be writing fiction.
Then you're just a physicist.
You're just a dumb old physicist. You're not a fiction writer. You're some moronic scientist. I don't know.
Oh yeah.
While we're on this craft topic, though, I had a question for you. I think last time we spoke years ago, you talked about your process a little bit in terms of having multiple things going at once. You've already mentioned like the idea of this book came many years ago, or the title and pieces of it came, and it sounded like you worked in a sort of kind of nonlinear fashion, right? It's not like you write one book, publish it, write another book, publish it. Like it sounds like you almost have this store of ideas and manuscripts and titles, and you kind of pulled this one off the shelf and lifted it into being here as the most. Like, is that somewhat accurate, or am I way off base?
No, that's entirely accurate. And it sounds like a great sloppy mess.
No,
and
it's interesting. It's interesting to me because I think a lot of people mentally work that way, but they don't think of other writers as doing that. They see a book coming out and they're like, oh, how long did it take you to write this? And it's like, well, I don't know. Years ago.
My whole life, in a way.
I mean,
I'm still working on a story that I started in 2006. It's my 20-year story. I don't know if I'll ever get it right, but yeah, it's about a Haitian banana picker who discovers an underground nuclear facility in the jungles north of Port-au-Prince. And I want it to work. Like, I love this.
Wow.
I love this character.
Wow.
I love this fiction, but I'm not happy with it yet. And I don't know, there's something that's keeping me back from it. So I'll continue to chip away at it. But in the meantime, I'm writing a new novel that starts with the death of George Washington. And it also attempts to answer the ugly charge brought forth by Marsha Blackburn at the Ketanji Brown Jackson hearing, asking her to define a woman. Like, what is a woman?
it's so fucking weird.
Well, it's just, this is the level of intellectual discourse So I thought it might be really interesting if like a novel tried to answer that question. So that's where we're at. But yeah, so there's a lot of stuff kind of happening, but but I think what you're saying, Matt, is really interesting. Like, I never sat down and thought about this before in a detached way, but it's very logical. Like, if you have a bunch of stories that are bouncing around off of each other, they're helping each other in a way. They're doing something to help each other kind of get ready to be written in the way they need to be written. But I have no problem with letting go of pages. I know some writers who really struggle with like getting that page count, hitting those numbers, and I find that to be like a psychopathic way to write because seriously, like if you are so indebted to some random number of 100,000 words or whatever it is, I mean, then you're just going to be a slave to a number. I'd rather be a slave to a character. I would rather really feel as though they own me for a little while, which is like, that's the happiest when you're owned.
Which character has owned you the most from your body of work?
Oh, gosh, that's a great question. I mean, I think in order to really do it, they all have to kind of totally take you, right? So they've all taken me in different ways.
Oh.
I mean, I'll always have affection for Rovar, my first protagonist from the Convalescent. He is just he's such a Jess character. He's so outside of his space that he just makes sense to me in a way that feels, I don't know, very intimate and personal. Okay. Even though he's maybe the most outlandish character I've written so far.
Yeah.
Like the least familiar to realism. But there's something about him that like I'll never forget writing him, So yeah, he's one. But I also really love a character I wrote in a short story, The Death of Mustango Salvaje, for McSweeney's a long time ago. It's actually being made into a limited series. It's being filmed in Spain with Amalia Ullman. Yeah.
Cool. I'd not
so that's fun.
heard anything about this. Great.
Yeah, it's called Dog Meat Carne de Perro, and it's about a female bullfighter. So,
whoa.
Yeah,
when is this set to come out?
It's going to be a little while because we just secured the Spanish production team who's going to help us make it, but it's with A24. And,
oh, wow, cool.
Yeah, so hopefully that'll be...
They're making great stuff.
In the next couple years, I'm imagining they'll hopefully get it done. But yeah, it's exciting.
Limited series, like 8 episodes or something like that?
I think they're planning on 6 episodes.
6, yeah.
Yeah, which I think is actually better.
Yeah. What year did that story come out? I don't remember having...
Long time ago. 20 years ago, that story came out. Yep.
2004.
That's something that my editor, McSweeney's Eli Horowitz, the amazing Eli, said a long time ago, which is that a book has a life of its own, And so I think that's bearing that in mind. It's even more reason not to try to write for some imaginary audience and just keep churning books out because you feel this pressure to do so. I mean, there is so much glut in the book world, right? In particular, like right now, there's so much out there. And like, if you're on Instagram or any of these horrifying platforms, you're seeing the parade of 39, 75 most anticipated novels for March, you know, and you make you feel like it's a hopeless enterprise, you know.
That's true.
So it's even more reason to just cool it, you know, slow down, take your time. I mean, Matt wrote an amazing novel.
Thank
you know,
you.
the Balin deck is so good. And
you.
I don't know how long it took Matt to write this novel, but like you can feel the work at the line level. I mean, he took his time writing that book. And so you can tell, you know?
Yeah. And that's why, you know, when you were talking about like word counts, like, you know, I'll see someone occasionally post like, oh, I wrote 8,000 words today. And that's like,
who cares?
To me,
Is
that's
fart,
like,
fart, 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 fart.
Well, it's like saying, you know, the baseball game was one team had 112 pitches and the other team had 42 pitches. It's like, well, that doesn't tell you anything. That's one statistic. That's like saying I saw 1,000 objects today. It's like, what was that a story? What was the objects like? That obsession with length, I've really come to resent that. You know, and this is coming from someone who loves Infinite Jest, right? Like, but people who love like long books, it's like I love that book not because it's 1,000 pages,
exactly,
but because there's like a heart to it and lovable characters. And I you know, your first book was what 200 and something pages, and then the past two have been pretty slim, and that to me is like no different than like a sculptor who, you know, they sculpt an orange one day and then they do a banana and someone's like, oh, well, that one weighed 42 pounds and this one weighed 3 pounds. It's like, what are you talking about? Like, to me, the fact that you're able to do something really profound, really interesting with 130 pages is great. And, you know, it makes me hopeful that more people will read it because it's short. There does seem to be a bias that some people won't pick up 1,000-page novel just because it's 1,000 pages. But I've met very few people who won't pick up a 133-page book because it's 133 pages. So that what you said really resonates with me. So thank you for saying that.
Well, it's the delight of the novella, which does not get enough attention. I mean, nobody knows what a novella is. Everyone thinks like, oh, it's some medium length, but no one really knows. Is it 17,000 words? You know, like Assembly, Natasha Brown's Assembly.
Oh, yeah. I read that recently.
Yeah. Or is it like, you know, 46,000 words? Because 46,000 words is The Great Gatsby. Is it, you know, I think 47,000 words is Crying of Lot 49.
Oh.
So, you know, these word counts are so arbitrary. What isn't arbitrary is like the project of the fiction. So no one is going to call The Great Gatsby a novella. It's just not. It's a novel, you know? But you can sort of boil down, you know, certain narratives and you can say, oh, like there's a certain narrative of a certain length that's sort of a medium length that follows mostly a single character through a single kind of crisis. And you get a sense of this ambiguous state between intensity and compression, you know, where you feel like every sentence is carrying a different kind of, like it's a slightly heavier weight than in a novel. It has to advance, you know, more meaningfully, I guess, in a novella. But, you know, and I will say it can be read in a single sitting. And so it's doing the Edgar Allan Poe work of like the single effect. You can capture a reader and say, you can sit and read this thing in a few hours. It's going to take you longer than a short story. But what's cool about the novella, and I used this analogy, forgive me, a couple days ago with a group, and I got some laughs, so I'm going to repeat it, even though I'm like, I hate repeating myself, but maybe someone will enjoy this and have it make sense. Like, I think about a subway ride when I'm thinking about a novella, and like the short story likes to ride the subway with other people, you know, and likes to kind of sit in a pack. And then the novel is just like across the train, like man spreading somewhere, you know. But the novella is just politely riding the train with their legs crossed or whatever, like reading a novel, listening to their headphones. They don't need anybody else. Yeah, they're fine. Like, that's a novella. You know, it's totally independent and it's totally reasonable. You know, Ian McEwan called it the perfect form of fiction. He called it, you know, absolute perfection, which I think is, I don't know, for me, it makes a lot of sense. And when you look at my really kind of ugly, obvious habit of writing bifurcated fictions, like The Convalescent moved between two narratives, Enter the Aardvark moved between two narratives, and so does The Most. I think I'm like more of a novella writer than anything, maybe. Like, it's possible that that's just what I do, you know?
A novellaist?
I'm a novellist.
Novellist. It seems like Aristotle would agree with what you're saying too, with like the three unities, right? Of time and place and action, that like, you know, it happens within a short like time window, within 24 hours, like in the same location, and there's one sort of sole sort of action that happens.
Novellas can also cover a huge amount of time, though.
I think Aristotle's, you know, applauding. You know.
Yeah, like
sure,
the case of Benjamin Button, right?
Oh yeah,
Covers an entire lifetime,
a decade or a century. I mean,
yeah. But I think what's fun about it is that I think it actually stands to teach us a lot about the nature of form. I mean, I think it can help you actually think about like what a short story is or what a novel is to you personally, by examining and studying this particular strange little, because it's a strange little creature that I write, right? Like, it's the strange little thing. I don't know. There's something marvelous about them.
I mean, the term novel just is so flexible and expansive. I mean, I didn't think of this as a novella when I was reading it, or Into the Aardvark. I just thought it's this fiction, and it's in book form, and it's one story.
Yes.
And it's sort of, you know, you can't really define what a novel is, and there's so many different traditions from different countries that have, you know, different structures and different patterns of, you know, bookmaking. And I think as people who, like us, who, you know, buy a lot of books and love bookstores, you go into the store, you're looking at a book on the shelf. It's a physical object, and the size is part of it, but that's only like one small part of it. And,
oh, yes.
You know, when you were talking about books and lengths, like one of my favorite books is, you know, you go to the poetry section, some of them you need like tweezers to get off of the shelf. They're so slim, you know. And one of I think a perfect book is Philip Larkin's High Windows. And that book is like 33 pages long. And
I don't know this book.
No one thinks like, oh, that book is too short. They think that's a perfect book.
It's a perfect book.
It's a little gem of a book, and it's like 30, 40 pages. And, you know, could you even publish such a thing like that? I don't know anymore. But your sort of style as a writer, it definitely, like these hints that you have all these other projects is really intriguing to me. And like, you've already mentioned one thing that you have been working on for 20 years. You've got this limited series coming up. I was actually going to ask if you'd have any other interest. You've had interest in film rights for your other books, or they seem very like cinematic to me. So have you sold rights to them?
Yeah, we sold the rights to Enter the Aardvark. It's not public which director has bought it, so I probably shouldn't make that announcement, but
Martin Scorsese.
Orson Welles.
Leni Riefenstahl.
I mean, you know, it's fun. Yeah, I don't know. Well, it's been under option for, like 3 years, and they have the first 2 episodes written. And so hopefully this will be the magic quadrant, where we will finally go out. They haven't wanted to go out yet. They've wanted to go out with, I guess what they call the package, which is they want to put together, you know, they'll have the director, they'll have the lead, they'll have 2 episodes written. So then when they go to studios, they'll have a better chance of, you know, getting a really good relationship.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. And we are in the process as we speak of working with Hollywood and The Most for a feature film. So we, you know, things are looking good for that.
That's
we
cool.
shall see. We shall see. But, you know, it's the writing world and the film, you know, and the movies and film, it's like they're very different spheres. Yeah. And so writers have stuff that is taken to the finish line all the time, and like 2 inches before you get there, for some reason it doesn't happen. So hopefully, you know, it would be great to see that happen. I'd be thrilled. But yeah, in the meantime, all we have is sadly the book to entertain us.
What a loss.
It's such a bummer, but it's all we have.
What is your feeling, Jess, about like the possibility of your work being put into a film or a show? Like, as someone who, you know, you love a certain book, sometimes you might have trepidation about like, how is it going to be adapted, and what if the adaptation falls short, which oftentimes it does. Like, everyone says, you know, the book's better. What is, like, do you carry any anxiety as a writer about like your work being put on the screen, and like, will a director be able to do justice to what you've written? Like, how does that feel for you?
Well,
personally?
I've just been very, very fortunate to have, first of all, an amazing literary agent in Jim Rutman. I mean, Jim is the secret ingredient, not only to my career, but to so many other writers' careers. And he introduced me to my film agent, Brooke Ehrlich, out at CAA. And she's just an amazing person who understands, it's like she's got this like incredible ability to read a novel and say, these are the people that I think would be interested. How do you feel about them? And so I am very much a part of the process of deciding who we take this thing to. And so, you know, I would not be worried about Brooke taking me to a producer or a director who would not give the work its fullest deserved treatment and like artistic energy, basically. And I think any adaptation is going to be so wildly different.
Yeah.
But I like that. I like the idea of someone just running with it in their own way, so long as what they produce is something that is interesting, you know, and good and good. You know, one of my, I have a lot of really favorite adaptations, but like, you know, I mean, Paul Thomas Anderson with There Will Be Blood, right? Like, look what you can do in that translation between, you know, the Sinclair Lewis and a 21st century film starring Daniel Day-Lewis and his deaf son. You know, I mean, like in tone,
from the Upton Sinclair book, Oil, right?
Yeah, it's based on Oil, and book? So, or you know, like even Brokeback Mountain as an example. I mean, like the film is totally different, and it's got a little bit of that commercial sheen because it's Jake Gyllenhaal and he's just such a glamour puss, you know.
Yeah,
but
and Heath Ledger too.
Yeah, but but it's Ang Lee, and Ang Lee like gives that relationship such a beautiful, earnest treatment, and it just it completely changed reading that story for me. And but what they did was so interesting. Like in the story, there's a moment when Jake is going to Ennis's parents' house. Oh no, sorry, it's Ennis who's going to Jake's parents' house after he's died, and they like serve him some cherry cake, and that is a detail, one of those tiny little details in the story that ended up coming out in the film. And so they really were careful, I think, with the material. So I think that's
about trusting the creatives that are like in the driver's seat to do good justice to what you've done. Yeah, but and also you can think of it as like you've provided source material, and like they might take it in some other like creative direction potentially, and being cool with that if it's a good direction.
Because how can you do it? I mean, you can't ever do it. It's not like how do you really adapt a novel into film? It's just you know, you're not getting the subconscious. So totally. How do you do it?
Yeah, it sounds like you're getting a good amount of creative control in the process with these two, and that sounds like a crucial piece.
It's fun.
Hey, Dave, did we want to ask her to read a section from The Most?
Yeah, we would love it. Is there a passage or is there a section that you would want to read out loud for us, Jess?
Sure.
Give people a sense of the book?
Yeah, I can do that. Let me see. Well, let me just ask you, is there a section that you guys would want me to hear me read, or?
I didn't flag a specific section. I do like all the stuff about Sputnik and the dog being sent into space.
I mean, I sort of think really because this is somewhat linear, like starting at the beginning might be okay.
Sure.
Oh yeah, that works too. Yeah.
Kathleen Beckett awoke feeling poorly. It was Sunday, November, warm for this time of year. She threw off the covers and turned onto her back, undoing the bow of her sleeping gown. She wouldn't go to church, she told her husband Virgil, but there was no need for concern. Everyone should go on without her. Virgil hesitated. They had been going to church for 6 months now, and his wife had not yet missed a service. "Dear, are you sure you're all right?" he asked, flipping a necktie. Kathy to her friends, Katie, when Virgil felt sweet, nodded from the bed. "I'm perfectly fine," she said. "I shouldn't have slept in the flannel. You go. I'll see you when you get back." Virgil kissed his wife on the forehead. Their sons, Nicholas and Nathaniel, were standing in the doorway. "Mother's not well," he told them. "Go dress yourselves." The boys stared at their mother. "What's wrong with her?" said Nicholas. Virgil glared at him. "I said your mother's not well. Don't bother her." The boys retreated into their bedroom and put on their church suits. Virgil made breakfast and then piled everyone into the family's brand new 57 Buick Bluebird and departed for the First Presbyterian. The church was 15 miles from Acropolis Place, the sunny, pentagon-shaped apartment complex on the outskirts of Newark, Delaware, where the Becketts had lived since last May, ever since Virgil started at Equitable Life in Wilmington. Kathleen picked it out. Though it was only an apartment, it was new, carpeted in green wall-to-wall, and its signature feature was a gas fireplace that lit with a switch. There was an icebox, a floor-to-ceiling bookshelf for her novels and cookbooks. In the living room, a sliding glass door led out to a white wrought-iron balcony overlooking a small, kidney-shaped community swimming pool, which the Becketts, in their brief tenure at Acropolis Place, had never seen anyone use. Virgil didn't care where they lived, so long as Kathleen was happy, but he'd taken a pay cut to move back to Delaware and work at Equitable. Their house in Rhode Island sold for what they paid almost a decade ago. He hoped they wouldn't stay long at the apartment. After Christmas, he figured, they could start looking for a house in Wilmington, but until then, each Sunday the family would travel the 15 miles to the First Presbyterian and sit in the wooden pews for 40 minutes listening to Reverend Underhill speak with passive equanimity about Jesus Christ and potluck suppers. Usually after the service, Virgil and the other men from Equitable lingered on one part of the church's front lawn in pressed suits and fedoras, smoking and talking business, family, the free afternoon, while the women, crisp in their crinolines, lingered in the vestibule, chatting with the Reverend, anticipating an afternoon of cooking and cocktails. Today, the unseasonably warm weather prompted everyone to flee the First Presbyterian as quickly as possible, leaving the Reverend to watch his congregation hastily press themselves into their cars and wonder what it was he'd said that sent them running. Virgil Beckett was the first out the door. Major chords of the last hymn still sounded in the nave as he whispered to the boys to get their coats. "I'll check on Kathleen first," he thought, "then I'll call Woos." The course was bound to be open on a day like this, he thought, though he'd never golfed this late in the season before. There were barely any leaves on the trees. Virgil had thought about golfing throughout the entire sermon and could not tell you a word of what Reverend Underhill said. Having grown up in California, he appreciated Indian summer and pictured himself in his summer shirt and slacks, swinging iron, feeling the sweat slide down his back. He imagined the smell of the warm browning grass beneath him, the sight of the hanging November sun in the sky. Now, rushing the boys to the car, he wondered whether the course was even open, and if so, whether anyone would have bothered to rake and mow. "In you go," he said, and the boys tumbled into the back of the Bluebird. Virgil glanced at his sons through the rear view. They hadn't spoken much this morning and were slouched in the back seat. Their coats were already off, their faces pink and sticky. "You boys okay?" he said. "We don't like church clothes," said Nicholas. Nicholas, the younger of the two, often spoke for himself and Nathaniel. "We're almost home," Virgil said. "When you get home, you can change and then go outside. Isn't this a great day? Are you going to go play stickball or something? Get a game going?" The boys didn't answer. Virgil struck the left-hand turn signal on the Bluebird. The car tick-tocked, and they waited. It suddenly occurred to Virgil that Kathleen might be pregnant. He didn't know why he hadn't thought of it until now. Though most women were finished by 30, a third child at her age wasn't unheard of. Most of the agents at Equitable had 3. But a man had to be cautious. You couldn't get greedy and take on more than you could handle. Virgil didn't know him well, but Tom Braddock had 4 boys and was apparently envied for years. Then, a month ago, the oldest one died. It happened right outside his house. Some kind of a blockage in the brain, or was it the heart, leg? At any rate, the boy just collapsed on the front lawn, and now Virgil regarded Braddock warily. It was the worst sort of terrible luck, he felt, the kind that might attach itself to you if you got too near it. Virgil's boss, Lou Porter, had told Braddock to take a good deal of time off, whatever he needed, and everyone pretended it was for Braddock. Truth was, no one could stand to be near him. Virgil wondered if the baby would be a girl. It would be good for Kathy to have a girl, he thought. He was happy with his boys, but a little girl could keep Kathy company in a different way, and he worried sometimes that she was lonely in a house of men. By the time he made the final turn into Acropolis Place and steered the Bluebird into the carport, Virgil Beckett saw the new baby girl as clearly as he saw the warm afternoon golfing. He helped the boys out of the back seat, slammed the car doors, then traveled up the stairs 2 at a time to apartment 14B and went directly to the bedroom to check on his wife. "Kath," he said. She wasn't there. Virgil stood for a moment, looking at the bed. It was neatly made. Kathleen? He left the bedroom and searched the living room, kitchen. There was no sign of her. He was thinking she might have slipped out for some bear or something when he heard Nicholas cry out, "Mother's in the pool." And I'll stop there.
That's perfect.
Good hook.
Perfect.
Good start to the novel. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Why the
Thank
pool?
you.
You're really able to pack in so much into that first chapter, really setting it up where there's really not a wasted line. It's really deft in that, like I said, like a sculptor, you're almost able to, in a very matter-of-fact way, almost like reportage of what's happening, but there's so many little details and strands. Like you said, these are real people. They're listening to the radio. There's this dog up in space. They're in their own head.
Cold War
I'm
politics.
really excited for people to get this book. I think it will do as well or better than your previous book. I'm really excited, and I think people will take it to the pool to read.
Seems likely. It's
To
coming
the
out in July.
beach, and the cover is great too because it, like you said, it does seem like contemporary, but it also seems like could be a 1950s woman.
Yeah. They did a cool thing, which was recreate 50s newsprint. So it actually looks like old saturated
The dots.
color. Yeah, the dots, man. So, yeah, thank you. Thanks, Matt. It's nice
beautiful.
of you to say.
No, it's really a beautiful book, and we're just really lucky to have you here to talk to about it because I really loved it. Like Dave, I read it really quickly, digested it, took a bunch of notes, and then went back this morning and had to read it again. Looking at your other books too, I love that some of your obsessions with other topics shine through, like even fit into this book. And was that sort of natural to you, or did you think like, you know what, I'm going to put it in?
What do you have in mind in particular?
Little
like
troll
Monterey,
person.
California.
Oh,
or,
yeah.
Tennis.
The bridge. I mean, the bridge is kind of like,
bridge.
it's not the center of the book, but in a way it is like the bridge between her past and another person.
Yeah, I mean, what was fun about writing this novel was kind of throwing out and working with all of these different textures and images and, blatant metaphors that I could just very artfully, gently like skirt around and never really fully flesh out if I didn't feel like it. So, I mean, there's a lot going on actually in this day, in this moment. Like you mentioned, Laika. So those of you who are unfamiliar, Laika is the little Soviet space dog who went up in the second Sputnik. So Sputnik 1 took off, I think was it October 3rd? Is that right? My memory may not be off there, but it wasn't for a month later that they sent another Sputnik into space, and this time they put the dog in there. And the story of Laika is so sad and so tragic. I mean, they found this little dog and they harnessed her into the spacecraft. And, they trained her to some degree to be accustomed to living in this little small space, but nobody had any idea how long she would live. And so, they sent her up there with all of this food. And I think, Sputnik 2 circled the Earth for, I believe it was more than a few days right before it came down again. And there was for a long time a mythology that Laika had lived for quite a while. But really, the dog died. I think it was under 8 hours that the dog died.
Oh,
and
wow.
So, she just overheated. And you can imagine this pressure of this animal in this tiny little rocket in outer space, just being in her little trapped vehicle and fundamentally dying because of it. And so that's going on, right? All of that decline of the animal is happening, as Sputnik 2 is circling Earth. And Kathleen is in her pool underneath this thing that's happening in outer space. And so, and then you have the bridges, right? I mean, the bridge that I was guarding, it appears in the novel. It's I'm manifesting it in this fiction, and it's the Mária Valéria Bridge in Štúrovo, Slovakia, and it was blown up in World War I and then rebuilt, and then blown up again in World War II, and it was left unbuilt for 60 years. And so now they have an artist in residence there to guard the bridge, right? So from further fascism, and I've returned to this for another book, but the thing about it is it's just feels so important to me. It's like, here we are on the heels of this horrifying, declaration by the Supreme Court that suddenly the president has total immunity over official duties. And that is such a huge transformation from what we understand democracy to be, that I feel that the only thing that, a fiction writer can do is like write more fiction that fights these forces, right? And so that's making an appearance too in the novel. And, I am not even fully reconciled in my own mind about the representation of these various objects that are flying around. I think I'm a little bit in the camp of the surrealist Andre Breton, who enjoys like the slipperiness of the object and how he insists that the object be recontextualized before it finds its full meaning. There's a great little treatise he wrote in the 1920s called Mad Love. I don't know if you've read it, but I really recommend it. And so yeah, I enjoyed like having this landscape, these various elements in place, and then deciding whether or not they were inevitably going to mean anything. But what I like about the book is that some of these metaphors that feel maybe very obvious, they really it's not a metaphor novel. I mean, they are not representing Kathleen and Virgil. It's just the atmosphere they're living in, right? That has all of these other elements kind of around them. So it's like imagining watching Waiting for Godot on stage, right? But instead of the lonely tree, what do you have? You have like a menagerie of different animals on stage that they are talking around, So you're basically just like recasting the terms of the discourse, of the dialogue.
Yeah, and Breton also wrote Magnetic Fields, which is a really strange book, which the band took their name from that book. And they're, you describing Sputnik as being out in this sort of its own magnetic field around the Earth. And these characters, they have this sort of invisible fields around them where, there's not going to be a huge confrontation, and they're sort of impenetrable in a way. And how can you, describe what they're doing is the best way to sort of break through those fields. But like those connections between people, I mean, I think that's what life is all about. And like, what else is there to write about, right? Except for how people interact.
Yeah, right. But is there anything worse than that obvious metaphor? I mean, that's the thing that scares me.
Yeah, I didn't see that at all.
Yeah,
like I say, I don't. You're spot on. Like the book has nothing to do with setting that up as, this is a metaphor for that. It's
right,
more
exactly.
Like this is the fabric of their time. And what I was thinking more is just like the suburban angst that people resonate with now, because it was more prominent in the 1950s because it looks more cliched, but people still, it resonates now because people still, I live in the suburbs and I still think about it of like, this resonates with me of reading about these other people who felt trapped or sort of disembodied out in the lonely suburbs, because it's still part of our lives, still happening.
Phenomenon, yeah.
And again, they're not really in the suburbs. Like you said, Newark, Delaware, which is interesting. I was thinking Newark, but
it's Newark.
Newark.
Yeah, they will tell you.
Oh, that's great.
They will make sure you know.
Yeah, and our current president being probably the most famous Delawarean, Delawareite.
It was recently named the 48th least fun state in the union or something. Poor Delaware.
Which two are worse?
I don't know. I didn't see the full list. I just saw that little tidbit on Delaware.
Wow.
And I felt bad for them. There's a famous actress from Delaware. Aubrey Plaza is from Wilmington, Delaware. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Wayne's World really dunked on Delaware. They did famously too.
Poor
right?
Delawareans.
We're in Delaware. Well,
I actually had to research the pronunciation of Mansher and Prettyman for the audio version of the novel, and so in the last hour, I was like, "How do I?" I didn't know if it was Mansure or Mansure, and so I ended up like I called a tailor shop, like a men's suit shop in Wilmington.
Nice.
And they'd said on the line that they'd been around since 1952. And I was like, what are the chances that I'm going to meet somebody who's going to know, And this elderly gentleman picks up the phone. And he is just the loveliest man. And I tell him why I'm calling, that I really need to learn how to pronounce Mansher and Prettyman. And he paused for me and he said, well, why aren't you doing a story about us? We've been around longer than those guys. Those guys, their business died in 1997. What's wrong with you? You know?
It was great. It was
It was
indignant.
great. But he knew, and he told me, and I got a whole bunch of other stories. I wish I called him sooner, but but yeah, it was just a great little moment there.
Well, and they do
that's
move.
cool.
You know, that's part of the story too. Is that they do move from a house to an apartment, and
Right.
in a way
From
that
Rhode Island.
it feels like a failure in a way. Like, it's temporary, right? We're going to get out of here.
And the thing about not making money on their house in a decade, it's like selling it for the same price they bought it
That's
for.
a failure.
That's autobiographical.
Like for you or your parents.
Oh no, totally for me. Oh, it was so sad. But you know, this was way back. We sold it. Let's see, it was in 2014. So this is before the great housing, you know, rise, like the skyrocketing prices. But yeah, we did. I think we may have even like lost a little money on our house. We overpaid for it in 2005 before the housing crisis. Anyway, yeah, that's a true story. That's
That's
true
funny.
story.
That's funny.
True tragic story.
True tragedy of Jesse Anthony, sadly. Yeah.
There's a lot about Monterey, California in this book too, with Coke, with Virgil's dad. Have you spent much time in Monterey, or was that just kind of...
Well, I lived in San Francisco for a year, and so I know the area pretty well, but I mean, I would not obviously call myself someone who knows Monterey intimately. But I just really love, I don't know, the sort of sensory feelings that one gets when one is in that region, like the Santa Cruz, San Francisco, Monterey. Like, it's so different from the East Coast. I mean, the air is different out there. And just the sort of, I don't know, the energy of people feels very, very different. And so, I don't know, Virgil is, like, as a West Coaster, it made sense that he would be from a place that was sensory enough for him to kind of, like, not have to pay attention to much. Like, he is actually, weirdly, in his way, pretty connected to nature, even though he's not good at anything natural. He doesn't really do anything natural. But yeah, and so it felt like a natural counterpoint to Kathleen's wealthy upbringing in Wilmington.
I loved that character of Coke, who is Kathleen's father-in-law, Virgil's father. And there's a famous governor of Texas named Coke Stevenson, who LBJ ran against for the Senate in 1948. And if you read the great biographies of LBJ, you get a lot of Coke Stevenson, and actually, like, your descriptions of the Coke character in this book reminded me, he's more of like a cowboy, right? And but like from Monterey, and he lives in this really primitive shack. But yet he has, like, maybe it's because he's in touch with nature and his own self. He's got some good intuition. And so I thought that was a great character. And again, it's hard to do a lot of different full characters in the short amount of space. And you have to be really economical with how you paint them. And, you know, he's not introduced in that section you just read there, but comes up later as a more prominent role in the book, I would say.
Oh, yeah. No, Virgil's father is an exaggeration of my grandfather, Bill Anthony. He was a reverend. He was a traveling Episcopalian minister, and he was so tough on everybody. You know, there's a sort of a rightness of attitude and a confidence that we are going to see, I think, maybe lost in our generation. I mean, you can see it maybe in, like, a really absurd way in some right-wing radio talk shows. Like that like man thing they do, like alpha male thing, you know. The Dave
I'm really
Portnoy's.
okay if that dies.
I mean, but it's its own kind of, like, they're trying in their way, I think, to be the natural leaders who these men were at the turn of the century. And they just, I mean, they are not on the right planet for that, and so. So it's like failing, and because they're failing, they keep trying harder, and so they like become even more aggrandized versions of it. But it's the same kind of principle that they're never wrong. You know, they're just always right. And I liked the idea of a character like that actually being right. And so he was a lot of fun to write. Coke Beckett was, especially on the phone, you know? I mean, I remember my grandfather just hanging up on people because you'd have to pay money, right? It was expensive. Like long distance used to be expensive. So you just, you know, oh, I guess we're done.
So Jess, do you get to go on a book tour for this time? Is it looking good?
Yeah, we've got some events. Yay.
Do you want to plug any of them?
Sure.
Cool.
I will be at the Book Club Bar in New York City for the launch of the novel on July 30th. I will be in Portland, Maine at Print Books on July 31st for the Maine launch. And then the following week, I've got, August 7th, I'll be at Porter Square Books. And on August 8th, I will be at Riff Raff in Providence, Rhode Island. I may have an event coming up at Politics and Prose. We haven't fully settled on a date yet, but hopefully that'll be sometime in August also.
It's a great store in
Where's that?
D.C., Washington, D.C.
Sorry, yep,
Oh, cool.
Washington, D.C.
Nice.
Yep.
Cool. Amazing. Well, we hope another pandemic doesn't hit like this month.
Thanks. Yeah, that would be nice.
Dates. I hope you actually get to celebrate and have a bit of a joyride this time.
I mean, we have so many other things going wrong. It's like it's just par for the course, man. I mean, we are in such deep shit. So it's just it's the way it's going to be, I guess, from here on out. Like, I don't see for the foreseeable future, like America is just going to be in a deep load of trouble. So, but thank you guys for reading and for talking to me about this little sucker. I really appreciate it.
We love it.
Great
It's been
pleasure. Thank you so much for having it sent to us, and we hope that our audience got like a cool sense of what is wonderful about this book and gets a chance very soon to read it for themselves. So we encourage our listeners to go and get this. You will read this very quickly. My wife said to me last night, "When did you read the most? I don't ever remember having seen it around the house." I was like, "Yeah, it was a really quick little couple days, and it's lovely." Matt, any final business or?
No, I just want to thank Jessica again. This has been really
thank you,
lovely
Jess.
and wonderful, and what an honor to get to talk to you and just
twice in our lifetime.
Continue to admire your work, and
it's incredible.
Are huge fans, and will literally buy everything that you publish. So keep writing more.
Thanks, you guys. It's great to see you both. Thanks
too.
for having me.
Dave, any housekeeping items before we go?
If people want to get in touch with us, we are concavityshow@gmail.com. And what was the phrase that you used earlier, Jess? Like if you've had the displeasure of being in any of these horrid social media hellscapes. We're
sure.
Concavity Show on Instagram and Twitter, whatever it's called now. Big thanks to Parquet Courts and Andrew Savage for their theme song, Instant Disassembly. And any other thank yous, Matt?
Thank you
the show notes.
To Chris Ayre for designing our logo. Chris Ayres.
Yeah, we haven't mentioned Chris Ayres in a while.
I just a few weeks ago finished the DFW conference, so anyone listening who I saw there got to meet a few Concavity Show fans. That was really great. So thank you to any new listeners we picked up there and old friends who are listening. Thank you very much.